Pacers absolutely crushed by the Spurs in Paris. Game 1 in France. Terrible on both ends. Defense, awful. Offense, pretty bad. Was anything good? Wemby sure was. We have a lot to discuss on today's Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Friday, everybody. Congrats, you made it through the week, and welcome into another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Paris residents, currently the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes, and today, Pacers were dreadful in Paris to open the Paris games, smoked by the Spurs. One of the worst halves the Pacers have played all season, probably the worst defensive half they have played all season, rivaling some of their Memphis-level performances, if you remember those. It was embarrassing. Pacers lose by 30 to the Spurs. Nothing went right. What happened? Can they be better in the next game? Did anything go well? Wemby was awesome. We're going to dive into all of it today. That's what we do. This game got out of hand very quickly. It was close at halftime, believe it or not. In fact, the optimistic person would say, hey, they tied at the end of the first quarter, and Spurs really hot from deep. It was a 2-point game at halftime. Like, only the third quarter was really bad. In fact, outside of the third quarter, Pacers only lost the game by 8. Yeah, that's all true, but it didn't feel good at all for the Pacers, who had nothing going with any sort of consistency. And where I would start to tell you that you could tell the Pacers were going to be bad is actually in reverse. I should have noticed this. So the Pacers defense was awful the whole game. And I'm about to run through some numbers about how bad it was and some of the stuff that I noticed that was dreadful and how much the Spurs ripped them apart. There was a play in the fourth quarter of this game where Stephon Castle just destroyed Andrew Nembhard with a move, got all the way to the rim, right? Thankfully, Aaron Nesmith was there, and Nembhard and Nesmith generally in the range of the defender. Castle missed the shot. But then Harrison Barnes, older Harrison Barnes, out-hustles Aaron Nesmith for the rebound and then dunked it. And, like, that's a very unfavorable way of describing the play. Like, they were both trying and they just got beat. It happens in the NBA. But those are the Pacers' two best effort guys on defense, and they just got torched by, like, two, albeit good, but role players by the Spurs. And it was that kind of night for the Pacers where, going back to the Castle beating Nembhard to the rim part, that is where I thought the Pacers were the most dreadful in this game. They could not stop a chair in this game. I mean, whoever they were guarding, just right by him to the basket or a quick move to the rim, a quick cut, easy shot. Everything was easy for the Spurs, and it started with that. The Pacers could not keep anybody in front, and the whole Spurs offense opened up from there. But if you've been listening to this podcast all season, or you've been watching the Pacers all season, you'll remember that stretch I mentioned earlier in this podcast. You know, the Pacers played Memphis, and they had that 45-point first quarter, or 43, whatever it was, and they still lost. And then right before that, they played Detroit and lost by 24. And right after that, they struggled a lot with Toronto and Brooklyn. And I kept asking during that stretch, Pacers were playing some awful defense, what are they taking away from their opponent? Their opponents were getting wide open threes and easy shots at the rim, and it just felt like the Pacers couldn't stop anything. Like, no matter what lineup was on the floor for their team, it was going to be easy baskets. That's how this game felt to me. I haven't felt this way about a Pacers opponent since that game in Boston, where Boston just drilled a billion threes and ran through them. But they took away nothing, right? Let's start with the threes. The Spurs, the San Antonio Spurs, who entered the day 24th in the NBA in three-point percentage, 18 of 36 from deep. Devin Vassell, 5 for 6. Wembanyama, 4 for 11. Harrison Barnes hit both of his. Lots of guys hit one who only took one or two, right? Trey Jones, Malachi Branham, Jeremy Sohan, Julian Champagnie, Keldon Johnson, Chris Paul, and Stephon Castle on that group. Great three-point shooting night for the Spurs by the numbers. And they were all wide open. Not all. I mean, that's a bit of a stretch, but primarily very open looks. And on one hand, I could easily tell you, hey, a lot of these guys aren't good shooters. It's the reason the Spurs are 24th in three-point percentage, somewhat by design, given that Wemby's really good, that some of them were open the way they were, but not all of them. A lot of that was disconnected play, poor rotations, late, bad communication from the Pacers, and that led to the Spurs hitting 18 of 36 from deep. In fact, that is tied for the best three-point percentage the Spurs have had in a game this season. Only the second time they've hit 50% from deep. The Spurs are now 10-1 when they hit 40% or better from deep in a game. They were on fire. They couldn't miss, right? And so on one hand, you could, if you were the very optimistic fan that I described earlier, just shrug and say, oh, well, they were hot, whatever. That's not going to happen. If they shoot a normal percentage, it's a closer game. Well, duh. But that I would not have that take because the Pacers also weren't stopping the other thing, right? The theoretical trade-off is, well, if they got open threes, thank God you cut off the rim, right? No, no. The Pacers struggled with that too. 66 points in the paint for the Spurs in this game, outscoring the Pacers inside the arc as well. What were the Pacers taking away? The answer was nothing in this game. In fact, you look at that kind of box score, you can really see it. But in fact, 140, the most the Spurs have scored in a game this season. Of course, they're going to win when they hit that. The Spurs, when they score over 115, a low bar, over 115, they're 12-1 this season. And they scored 140. I mean, that just awful defense from the Pacers all night. They could not stop anybody. The final stat I would use to continue to tell you about how bad the Pacers played on the defensive end is 41. Oh, whoops. This is the wrong box score. Oh, that's right. Still, I had the right number. I opened the wrong thing. 43 assists for the Spurs. 43 assists. Yes, Greg Popovich teams are great at passing and setting up their teammates. That is 5 more assists than they've had in any game this season. Even in the game they scored 139 against the Wizards, they only had 38 assists. 43 in this game. Their season high by far. Similar to all the other stats I'm telling you. When the Spurs have, let's go right here. When the Spurs have over 31 assists in a game this season, they are now 14-2. They did everything that they want to do offensively, and it was comically easy at times. I tweeted that in the third quarter. Comically easy. The final number to nail in the coffin this, 45 third quarter points for the Spurs. Chris Denari said this on the FanDuel Sports Network broadcast of the game. I don't know how to look up quarter stats because I should know that. That is the Spurs season high for points in a quarter. Dreadful. Absolutely dreadful defense for the Pacers in this game. If you've been listening to this podcast this week or watching the Pacers at all since December 9th when they got smoked by the Hornets, you know they're defending better, right? They've had some shooting luck on their side from opponents, but better, like 10th to 15th best defensive team in the league. And that's not a fluke. That's been like over a quarter of the season. They've been at that level, and they were back to what people think of them as defensively in this game. Awful, awful, awful. No matter who was on the floor, they couldn't get stops. So here's what I can forgive. Forgive is the wrong word, but here's what I can understand, right? Wemby was unbelievable. We'll talk about him later, but 30, 11, and 6 was just ridiculous. Like when Wemby would catch it 10 feet in, even sometimes with Turner behind him, the Pacers would swarm him. They'd double him, right? Because when he dribbles, it's such a high dribble, it can be stolen. Like he does have a turnover issue. He had 4 in this game, right? And so sometimes the double was to prevent him from getting a good shot. Sometimes it was for steal reasons, whatever. So like if the Spurs are really perfectly connected, which they had a lot of these in this game, to their credit, if Wemby gets it out and then they move it twice and then the Pacers' rotation's a little off because they were doubling somebody and a basket happens, like that's still bad. You got to rotate and communicate better. But like I get why that particular basket happened, right? Okay, you're doubling the star player who's played amazing, whatever. But it's not just that. Like the Spurs were dominant on offense even when Wemby wasn't on the floor. In fact, if you listened yesterday to the full podcast Dustin Dopierk and I did, I ran through the on-off numbers the Spurs have with Wemby. Their net rating without him on the floor this season is like comparable to the Wizards, like worst team in the league bad. The Spurs in this game were plus 12 with Wemby off the floor. That was the stretch that put it away. It was like a 12-point game, 13-point game when Wemby came out in the third quarter and the Pacers were already having a bad quarter. He came back in and they were up 20. They were up more. Like that killed the Pacers. They had no chance at that point. So just a dreadful defensive night. The Spurs ball movement, cutting drives, everything, no problem. Got to the basket, easy peasy. This was the second biggest Spurs win of the season. They beat the Clippers 122-86 for their biggest win of the season on New Year's Eve. But that's more of a Spurs score to me, like low 120s, but they have an awesome defensive night, right? Not like this, 140 for the Spurs, and the Pacers couldn't really score either, which is coming up here in the second segment. Nothing went right for the Pacers, and their defense is to blame. I mean, adjustment-wise, number one, the boring adjustment, the play better adjustment. My God, were they disconnected. Get up and be aggressive with the ball pressure, right? You saw them start to press more late in the third quarter and early in the fourth. Probably too late at that point, obviously, with the scoreboard. But, they had a group come out with 5 bench guys, and, like, all 5 of them were pressing, basically. The ball pressure will help. disrupt the Spurs. The Spurs had 19 turnovers. That kept the Pacers in it for a while, was that turnover issue. So I'd provide more ball pressure. I would personally do this. I don't know if the Pacers think this is smart. I would put Pascal Siakam on Wemby to start the next game. I think smaller guys can do just as well there. I mean, Myles Turner would contest and he just shoots over it. Like, that's a huge height difference. You still need some size on him, but a little less. You can get lower center of gravity to match his. You can get more steals in that way. I would just try it, although it is obviously very tricky to have Myles Turner on someone else. I guess I'd put him on Barnes if I'm the Pacers, but then where do you put Tyrese Haliburton, who was on Barnes at times in this game? So it is tricky, but I would think about that as the Pacers, because they do play the Spurs again, obviously, in 2 days. So tricky defense. They've got to be just better, more connected. They've got to communicate better. The Spurs not shooting like that will help. Certainly, they've got to defend Wemby better. They've just got to be much better. That was dreadful. One of the worst Pacers defensive performances of the season. In fact, second worst. Only the second time all year that a Pacers opponent has hit 140 in a game. So they have a lot to clean up with their next game. Excuse me. Yes, that's correct. Sorry, I almost said the wrong thing, but that is correct. The only second time an opponent has hit 140. And they also need to score more. 110 ain't going to cut it for the Pacers. What went wrong on offense, short of just saying everything? At least some things looked okay offensively. We'll get to that coming up here on Locked On Pacers. Before we do that, though, I need to tell you guys about FanDuel. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets. If you win your first bet, that's $300 to keep the action going. The FanDuel app is easy to navigate, and the variety of bets keeps every game exciting. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. No waiting around for your winnings. Whether you're betting on your favorite team or just looking to add some extra excitement to the playoffs, FanDuel has you covered. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $300 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. We're back here on Locked On Pacers. Thanks for making us your first listen today and every single day. Make Locked On Spurs your second listen. Jeff Garcia will tell you all about Wemby and the crowd and the Spurs looking maybe the best they've looked all season. They had lost 3 in a row entering this game, and he was just tremendous. And Jeff will break it all down. He's all over the Spurs as a writer and podcasting over at Locked On Spurs. In Pacerland, nothing went well in this game. Their offense was okay in the first half, I thought, for the Pacers. Not good, to be totally clear, not good, but okay. You know, they were in it at halftime, but they were kind of in it for the wrong reasons, right? Their first half reasons the Pacers were in it was because the Spurs had too many turnovers. And they continued to have that problem, to be clear. The Spurs finished with 19 turnovers, but they had too many turnovers, the Spurs did, and the Pacers were matching that with good shooting at key times. Obi Toppin hit 3 threes in the first half. Actually, on the first quarter, that kept the Pacers in it. Tyrese Haliburton hit 3 threes. Ben Mathurin and Siakam were rolling inside the arc. The bench was good in the first half. That helped the Pacers keep up that the Spurs, who only, air quotes, shot 40% in the first half. But I felt like this. I felt like, okay, if the Spurs clean up their turnover stuff, they didn't, and the Pacers shoot a little better, they'll catch up. The Pacers never shot better, even as the Spurs turnover issues were there. Like, in theory, last year, if this game happened, the Pacers would have lost 140 to like 128 or 130, but their offense never got off the ground today. So let's retreat to what I just said, because I forgot to make the point I was going to make. 19 turnovers for the Spurs in this game. Who do you think had more fast break points? The Spurs or the Pacers? Reminder, the Spurs had 19 turnovers and the Pacers had 11. The answer is the Spurs by a lot. 34-10 in fast break points. Points off of that lopsided turnover gap. The Pacers barely won that, 24-21. The easy points battle, even in a game where the Pacers kept up in the possession battle, the easy points battle was all Spurs. It wasn't even close, right? That really hurt the Pacers, who had to grind to find their shots. And Wemby does that to teams. He makes it scary to get to the rim. 54 points in the paint. I get why that number's a little lower for the Pacers, but they had too many shots that were just like, Wemby just erased it. And he had a stretch in the late third where it was just like, oh, he just ended the game. Like, he just was unbelievable. But the Pacers offense never got going in this game. They never had the juice to the flow that they've had when they've been at their best. And again, I get that Wemby's a part of this, but it felt like Wemby was always around the play. The guy he was guarding should not be setting the screen. Hardly ever. He did it a lot in this game. Caitlin Cooper tracked it, thankfully. She tweeted during the second quarter, I think, there needs to be less running action with Wemby, at Wemby with Turner as a screener. And I had something similar in my notes about how close to the play Wemby always felt, but she had the numbers. The Pacers scored 0.563 points per chance with Turner as the screener and Wemby as the screen defender. And yet Turner set 52.2 picks per 100 possessions, his 5th highest in a game this season. That shouldn't happen, right? So process-wise, they've got to get away from that. Whoever Wemby is guarding, get out of here. Get away. And if it's Turner and Turner spaces and he doesn't guard him, great. Turner can shoot well enough. He did not shoot well in this game. Turner had a very rough offensive game. He tried to go at Wemby a few times, didn't work. 2 for 9 from deep. I think that volume's going to remain for the reason I just said. That's fine. He's shown he can make the threes, but if he's not making the threes and he's forcing it and going 3 for 8 on twos, he just didn't provide very much in this game. Not a great Turner game. But anyway, offensively for the Pacers, to keep stacking on that, right? So Wemby wrecked a lot of their stuff. I get why that's a problem, but they never found any of the other juice that we've seen. Like they never had the fast break tempo. I already talked about that. Some of that was rebounding based, 31-57 on the boards. Now, let's be clear. The Spurs missed 38 times in this game, including free throws, right? The Pacers missed 56 times in this game. So that's 18 more chances for the Spurs to get a defensive rebound, and they had 20 more defensive rebounds. Like, that's not that crazy to me, okay? Some of the rebounding difference is just how much more the Pacers missed. But the Spurs dominated the offensive glass as well. They clearly had an effort thing going that the Pacers couldn't match, right? So the possession game gave the Pacers no chances. Their tempo gave them no chances. And nobody really could get out of the funk that, this team is a very good drive and kick team or drive and finish team even, right? I cite this all the time because it sticks with me, and you can see the Pacers playing better when they're good at this. When Jenny Busick said it last year on our broadcast, being interviewed by JJ at halftime, I believe, she said, we've got to be paint to great. That's what they say as their motto about offense. Get to the paint, things will go great. They couldn't do it, and Wemby was a big part of it. The Pacers guards, outside of one, who we'll talk about in the third segment, Ben Mathurin was awesome in this game, could not do that, right? Tyrese Haliburton, 5 for 11, but 2 for 4 on twos. That's okay as a 2-point ratio, 7 assists, no turnovers. That all looks good, but he couldn't get into the paint as much, right? Only 4 2-point attempts. He can't be an offensive dynamite when that's how the game goes. Andrew Nembhard was 0 for 5 on 2. Excuse me, that's not wrong. He was 3 for 5 on twos. He missed all 3 of his threes. He had 8 assists too. Like, those guys were getting other guys involved, but not the same way it usually goes for the Pacers with that sort of penetration. And with Turner not finishing plays, they were really reliant on their finisher, not creator types, and Siakam and Mathurin to do a lot of the scoring. And Siakam, to his credit, had 6 assists, but it just never flowed the same way with the guards not able to have as much success in the paint. TJ McConnell was 2 for 8 on twos. His start to the game was dreadful. He was better in the second quarter, but TJ McConnell was awful in the first quarter of this game. Continues to have finishing issues, and he couldn't really get going either. Only 4 assists. The bench in general was a problem, which we'll get to close here, but one of, if not several, of those Pacers point guards, if not all 3, honestly, has to be way better stylistically, scoring, shooting, something in the next game. They couldn't get the paint. None of them shot it particularly well. Haliburton at 3 for 7, but I think they came in a flurry in the first half. McConnell missed a corner 3. They need someone to be better from that group to get their offense going, because it never did in this game. 110 is just not going to cut it for the Pacers in this ever, really. When they're under 110 this season, they are now 2-10. Those 2 wins coming in that Cleveland game that they just won because their defense was great, and that Golden State game they just won because their defense was great. Their defense decidedly not great tonight. So offense needs to change. And if I zoom out, talking about the offense, the bench was awful. I mean, the bench, to go back to what I said with Dustin yesterday and early in the show when it comes to Wembanyama, I mean, they have to win the Wemby list minutes, right? But they didn't. They didn't even get close to winning the Wemby list minutes. They lost them by 12, and the bench needs to be much better on both ends, really. But let's just run through it. Obi Toppin, you're going to look at his night and think he had a good one. 4 for 7, 3 for 5 from deep, 13 points. Obi Toppin did play well, but so much of his impact was in the first quarter when he was 3 for 4 from the field, all from deep, and had 11 of his 13 points. The rest of the game, Obi Toppin had 2 points, right? TJ McConnell, 2 for 9. 4 assists, 1 turnover is good, but 2 for 9. Way better needed there. Aaron Nesmith played all 4 quarters. Good, 19 minutes. That's great for the long-term future of the Pacers. Right now, 1 for 5 ain't going to cut it, especially with the defense thing I said earlier. Ben Shepherd, 1 for 6. He missed all 4 of his threes. Not going to work. Jarris Walker, 1 for 5. He missed all 3 of his threes. The bench was awful in this game, and that just sunk them. If they had any chance of beating this version of Wembanyama and overcoming a bad defensive night, they needed something to click on offense. Haliburton and Nembhard couldn't get enough flow going. Pacers couldn't finish enough plays, and the bench could not make up for any of that. Dreadful from the Pacers on both ends. They need the bench to be better. They need their shot making to be better. They need to involve Wembanyama way less in the next game. Turner's shooting is going to be important. They have so many ways they can play better, but this was just dreadful in a lot of ways. Not every way, though. Some stuff went well, and it was a delight to watch Wemby. That's what we'll close out today's Locked On Pacers. Before we do any of that, though, let's talk about TALKSPACE. Therapy is a game changer. It can help manage stress, improve sleep, and communicate more effectively. But finding the right therapists and fitting sessions into a busy schedule can be a challenge. That's where TALKSPACE comes in. TALKSPACE, the leading virtual therapy provider, makes getting the help you need easy, accessible, and affordable. With TALKSPACE, signing up is simple. You can watch with a licensed therapist who fits your needs, usually within 48 hours. And it's convenient. You can have sessions from the comfort of your home and even message your therapist between appointments. Plus, TALKSPACE is covered by many insurance plans, and for the most insured members, there's a $0 copay. It's never been easier to prioritize mental health. As a listener of this podcast, you'll get $80 off your first month with TALKSPACE when you go to TalkSpace.com/LockedOnNBA and it's the promo code SPACE80 to match with a licensed therapist today. Go to TalkSpace.com/LockedOnNBA and enter promo code SPACE80 to get $80 off your first month and show support for this show. That's TalkSpace.com/LockedOnNBA, promo code SPACE80. Back here on Locked On Pacers. Thanks for making this your first listen today and every single day. Your second listen, apparently Jimmy Butler will go to any team but the Grizzlies. Well, what does Locked On Heat have to say about that? The never-ending Jimmy Butler updates. You never hear anything about that guy anymore, do you? Thankfully, if you want to, Locked On Heat is the place to go. I've had enough. I would like to opt out of Jimmy Butler updates until the trade, if it actually happens, does happen. Let's talk about basketball to close this one out. Some good stuff for the Pacers. One, Ben Mathurin. Woo! In fact, the French speakers were awesome in this game. Mathurin was great. I thought he should have played a little more. I get why the rotation is going to shift with Nesmith back, but the way the bench was playing, they didn't have enough juice from McConnell creating. I think they should have tried to mix in Mathurin with that group a little more if they could have. He was awesome in this game. 11 for 14. All of his 2-pointers went in. 9 for 9. He was the only guy who could find crevices to actually get into the paint and finish and score. 2 steals, 1 block. No assist isn't great. Only 3 rebounds is a poor night for him specifically. He's a good rebounder for a guard, but he was definitely the best Pacers guard at finding crevices to actually get into the paint and score. Early in the game, he was doing a great job. The Spurs, they're like a fine team, but they have some guys who are either tiny in height, they're small in terms of like width stature, not football size. And Mathurin would just post him up and turn and score. Siakam was doing that early too. Like, it felt like the Pacers got away from that. And credit to the Spurs, they took it away. They're a pretty good defensive team when Wemby's out there. But that needs to be something the Pacers can get back to, because Mathurin was just crushing. Open floor, drives, post-ups. He looked great. And I'm surprised he ends up playing the fewest minutes of any starter in this game. Carlisle, I think, will turn to him a little more next game, especially if he plays that well as a scorer, because he was very good. He, like everybody, had his weak moments defensively, but I thought Mathurin was the Pacers' best player and definitely their most consistent over the 48-minute game, and I think he needs to be a little more involved in the next, which makes sense. Like, this is the kind of game where you need a guard in particular to do well and step up. I've said that about the Pacers a few times when they've been playing against, like, the Cavs, for example. They're going to need a guard to step up against a team with good big or good bigs. Mathurin did that today. They need him to do that again in the next one. Siakam was pretty good as well. Only 10 shot attempts, which surprises me a little bit. He was 7 for 10 with his 18 points, 6 assists, 4 boards. You didn't feel him as much for a guy who had a nice statistical night. His impact was pretty spread out, so there was never a moment where he just totally dominated. But he had 9 points in the first quarter. Half of his scoring came there, and then 3 average the rest of the quarters. It's a classic Siakam, they go away from him kind of game. There's a lot of teams like this. Harrison Barnes is fine, but they don't have anybody with the size or girth to really hurt Siakam. He missed a few mid-range jumpers that he usually makes. So I think the Pacers, like with Mathurin, Siakam's going to have some matchup advantages. Try to get him involved, elbows and in, and see if he can create for himself a little bit. Now, they can't be too focused on that. They did have that problem tonight, like I said earlier. They played too slow when they mismatch hunt. That this happens to them fairly often, right? Those two are the best, Mathurin and Siakam, at thriving in a slower offense and creating their own shots in a grindy kind of game. But there were enough moments in this game, even early in offensive sets, where the Pacers just didn't get it to those guys quick enough. So some more zip on offense will help. But those two naturally created a lot of advantages for the Pacers, and a little more focus on them might go a long way, because they were by far the best Pacers players in this game. Those two, Toppin and Thomas Bryant, the only players to shoot over 50% in this game. In fact, only ones to shoot over 45% 42.5% in this game. And speaking of Thomas Bryant, I did skip him talking about the bench because he was actually good. He did play totally adequate in this game, 4 for 5 from the field. Only missed shot was a 3. That's fine. 3 offensive rebounds. That's a third of the Pacers total. You always want a little more from a big man in the defensive rebounding department, but there were no missed shots to grab. And he finished plays. He plays with force and energy every time he's out there. He was solid as well. I thought he probably should play a tiny bit more, especially if Turner is off in the way that he was in this game, but not a lot in terms of good stuff for the Pacers in this game. I mean, there's a reason they got completely embarrassed on the scoreboard. They struggled mightily. They could not get the shots that they like. They missed the twos that they do take. At one point in this game, I'm going to check what they finished at, but they were, under 50% on twos for like a long time in this game. They did a terrible job finishing and at protecting the rim. I mean, lots of stuff that they'll hope can just easily turn around. To put a bow on like where you saw the biggest difference in this game, besides just the crazy difference in the 3-point shooting, Pacers 6 for 9 from 0 to 4 feet, right? That's an okay percentage. 9 is a crazy low number of attempts from 0 to 4 feet. The Spurs were 17 for 20. The Pacers did not take away the rim from them at all. And then from 4 to 14 feet, the Pacers were 21 for 34. That was their only success, but they had to take a little bit farther away twos in this game. They need that ratio to go up, especially if they're going to miss threes at the rate that they did. The Spurs also finished well in there. The Spurs finished well from everywhere there. So if you're the Pacers, you're trying to find ways you can score more at the rim, even with that tall giant dude out there. You're trying to make more threes. You're trying to be more of a paint to great kind of flow offense team instead of being forced to grind it out, forced to play through your slowed down guys. And defensively, any improvement will go a long way for this team. I almost guarantee the Spurs won't score 140. In fact, I don't bet, but if I did, I would probably guess they'll be below 130 given their history this season as a team. They made offense look comically easy. So I'd expect the next game to be closer. And the last thing I will say in terms of the people's thinking about this game, saw lots of like, oh, get them home immediately. This is disrupting their season. This is terrible. This was bad. This was no doubt bad. Pacers played awful, not to excuse this at all. Their biggest loss of the season actually came within the stretch that everybody would consider their best stretch, right? Since that Hornets game, they've been very good. They lost to the Celtics by 37 in that stretch, their worst loss in point total of the season. They scored fewer points in that game. They scored 105 that night and gave up 142. They scored more than that and gave up less in this game. You know what happened in the next game? They played the Celtics in the same venue and beat them, right? Like, can we chill for a sec? If they get embarrassed again, obviously they deserve ridicule for that. But like I always say how hard it is for any team to beat another team twice in a row when they play twice in a row. It happened to the Pacers Cavs. It happened with Pacers Celtics. It's happened with Pacers lots of things for forever. Even when the Pacers are playing an inferior team, this challenge happens. So let's chill. Let's just see how it goes. They have been a response team in this era primarily, albeit with some flukes and some bad moments early this season. But they played awful, and they deserve a lot of ridicule for that today. You know who didn't play awful? I hate to opine on a player who's not on the Pacers to close this out, but I set alarms last season to watch Wembanyama. I tried to not bother Doug McDermott too much with just like random questions I had about playing with him last year, but that dude's amazing. No one plays like him. He does everything on the basketball floor and does it very easily. And even for his lofty standards, this was like one of the best games I've seen him play. I've probably watched 60 or 70 full Spurs games since they drafted him. He was amazing. I mean, he did everything, right? His defense is incredible. He can kind of pass now. His rebounds just come so easy because he's huge. He can shoot one-legged threes. He obviously finishes in the lane. He had a self-pass off the backboard. He hit mid-rangers. He hit threes. What are you supposed to do, right? If he plays like this again, there's a chance that the next game the Pacers play much better and still lose. He is just amazing. He is just amazing. There's a chance Myles Turner has another bad game at very little fault of his own, besides just like, oh, that dude's just taller and better than me. And that's happened to him before with other bigs. So look, if Wemby's that good, the Pacers are in trouble. Full stop. If Wemby's that good and the Pacers lose the minutes he's not in the game, they will lose again. They have a lot to work on. They have a lot they need to be better at. To me, it starts on defense. Take away something from the Spurs, but some offensive help could go a long way. They shot poorly from three. They only attempted 12 free throws. Just not a good night for the Pacers in any way. Tomorrow, nothing, actually. Sunday, after the Pacers play the next game, we'll have another one breaking down Pacers Spurs round 2, and then next week, a couple more shows before the Pacers actually play again. So lots of unique, different in-season topics coming here on Locked On Pacers. But the next show will be after another Spurs game, which will come on Sunday. Hope you guys enjoyed today's show. Sorry for me running out in the middle. I had food delivery come that I thought was going to come way later. You can find me on Twitter at Tony R. East and Blue Sky at the same place. That's the best place to yell at me if you think I said something stupid, this podcast has a Twitter account. It's at Locked On Pacers, where you can see every episode posted with all the topics involved, plus short clips from each one, and occasionally me fielding mailbag questions. Thank y'all for listening today. Hope you had a good one. We will see ya very soon.